In 1884, the incredibly wealthy railroad magnate Leland Stanford and his wife Jane suffered an unimaginable tragedy. Their only child, Leland Stanford Jr., died of typhoid fever at the age of 15. Overcome with grief, the billionaire industrialist reportedly turned to his wife and uttered the now famous words, "The children of California shall be our children." And with that singular emotional declaration, Stanford University was born.
Let me be absolutely clear before we proceed. I want to be incredibly careful here. I am not claiming a grand supernatural conspiracy.
It is very easy to look at monumental 19th century architecture and immediately jump to conclusions involving magic, lost civilizations, or esoteric folklore. We will not do that. We leave the fairy tales to the internet forums. The mainstream explanation provided by historians is, on the surface, entirely reasonable. A grieving father, possessing virtually limitless capital derived from the Transcontinental Railroad, decides to build a sprawling, magnificent educational monument to immortalize his son. He hires the most famous landscape architect in America, Frederick Law Olmsted. He hires the prestigious architectural firm of Shepley, Rutan, and Coolidge. He pours millions of dollars into an empty horse farm in Palo Alto, California, and in 1891, a world-class university opens its doors. The timeline is documented. The motives are deeply human and completely logical. The financial capability of the Stanford family is an undeniable matter of public record. It is a beautiful, flawless historical narrative. Until you close the biography and open the engineering blueprints. Welcome to TitanMetrics. Today, we are not auditing the logistical tonnage of the railroads. We are auditing the institutional gravity of the Stanford Anomaly. We are going to examine the subterranean matrix, the psychology of instant antiquity, and the terrifying precision of a seismic eraser. Let us open the ledger.
In civil engineering, every major project begins with the zero cycle. The preparation of the earth, the laying of the foundation, and the installation of the subterranean utilities. Stanford University sits on what was originally the Palo Alto stock farm, an empty, dusty expanse of Californian agricultural land. According to the official ledger, before the iconic golden sandstone walls of the main quadrangle were erected, the engineers had to establish the campus infrastructure. This infrastructure includes the infamous Stanford steam tunnels. Beneath the manicured lawns and the paved walkways of the modern university lies a massive, highly complex, interconnected labyrinth of subterranean passageways. The official historical narrative states that these tunnels were constructed in the late 1880s specifically to house steam pipes for heating, and later electrical conduits. The mainstream explanation is reasonable until you conduct a visual and structural audit of the tunnels themselves. If a 19th century contractor is hired to lay utility pipes under an empty horse farm, the standard operational procedure is highly efficient and utilitarian. You dig a narrow, shallow trench, you lay the iron pipes, you cover them with dirt or a simple wooden access grate. You do not build a sprawling network of cyclopean, vaulted brick archways. Look at the archival documentation and the modern structural reality of the Stanford tunnel matrix. Yes, today they house modern cables and steam pipes, but look at the architecture of the void itself. These are not utility trenches. They are massive, perfectly executed, multi-layered brick corridors. Many of these tunnels feature perfect semicircular Roman arches, engineered with a load-bearing capacity that vastly exceeds the requirements for a pedestrian walkway, let alone a mere housing for a steam pipe. Why would an architect, burdened with the task of quickly building a massive university from scratch, expend an astronomical amount of capital, master-level masonry, and millions of bricks to build an underground catacomb system that no student would ever see. The institutional logic does not align with the physical output. The dimensions of these tunnels frequently allow a grown man to walk upright with ease. The masonry techniques utilized in the deepest sections exhibit a level of wear, calcification, and foundational settling that suggests an age far exceeding the 1880s. We must ask the forensic question. Did Leland Stanford's engineers aggressively overdesign a buried utility trench to resemble a medieval aqueduct? Or did they simply adapt, clear, and utilize a pre-existing subterranean matrix that was already hidden beneath the soil of the Palo Alto farm? If the tunnels predate the university, then the zero cycle was not a construction, it was an excavation. They did not anchor the tunnels to the campus, they anchored the campus to the tunnels.
Let us elevate our audit from the subterranean zero cycle to the visible architecture above ground. When a billionaire industrialist in the late 19th century builds a brand new, cutting-edge technical and scientific institute, the architectural expectation is modernity. The Gilded Age was defined by steel, glass, and soaring Victorian verticality. Yet, Stanford University was intentionally designed to look like a collection of ancient, weathered ruins. The architectural style chosen for the campus is formally classified as Richardsonian Romanesque, blended with California Mission Revival. The result is an interlocking series of low, incredibly heavy, thick-walled cloisters. Look at the main quadrangle. Look at the sheer, overwhelming mass of the rough-hewn sandstone blocks. Look at the deep, cavernous archways that connect the buildings. The mainstream explanation is again perfectly reasonable. Historians state that Frederick Law Olmsted and the Stanford family specifically requested this aesthetic to reflect the climate and the Spanish colonial history of California. But from an auditor's perspective, there is a profound psychological and structural paradox at play. Why construct a facility dedicated to the future of science and industry using the architectural language of a 12th century monastic fortress? The massive sandstone blocks utilized in the original quadrangle were not cleanly cut or polished. They were deliberately left rough, heavily textured, and deeply shadowed. The visual effect is unmistakable. The day the university opened in 1891, it already looked as though it had been standing there for 500 years. This is the phenomenon of instant antiquity. We must ask, was this an expensive, highly curated, stylish choice by a grieving father? Or is the Mission Revival label a convenient, retroactive academic categorization applied to antecedent architecture? If you inherit an anomalous heavy stone infrastructure that survived a prior era of sudden geological accumulation, how do you integrate it into the modern world? You cannot make it look new. The stone is too heavy. The arches are too archaic. Therefore, you institutionalize the aesthetic. You hire prestigious architects to officially claim the design. You explicitly state in the historical ledger that you asked for the buildings to look old. By legally claiming the design of the ruins, you seamlessly overwrite their actual origin. The rough-hewn sandstone, the sprawling cloisters, the disproportionate scale of the arches, they are mathematically inconsistent with late 19th century educational design. But they are perfectly consistent with an infrastructure built by a civilization that operated on an entirely different structural paradigm.
The zero cycle presents a documentary anomaly. The architecture presents a psychological paradox. But the true, terrifying structural deficit of the Stanford narrative occurs 15 years after the university opened. April 18, 1906, the Great San Francisco Earthquake. The official history of this event is a well-documentary tragedy. A massive rupture of the San Andreas Fault generated a catastrophic seismic wave that leveled much of San Francisco and severely damaged the surrounding regions, including Palo Alto. I want to be perfectly clear. We do not deny the reality of the earthquake, nor the devastating loss of life. The tectonic event was absolutely real. But as forensic auditors, we do not merely acknowledge the destruction, we analyze the exact pattern of the failure. When the seismic wave hit the Stanford campus, it did not level the university evenly. It acted with the surgical precision of a targeted eraser. It selectively sheared off the most impossible, the most massive, and the most structurally anomalous components of the campus. Prior to 1906, the entrance to the university was dominated by the Memorial Arch. This was not a standard gateway. It was a colossal, freestanding, 100-foot-tall stone monolith. It was 86 feet wide, completely covered in intricate, deep relief carvings, heavily resembling the Arc de Triomphe in Paris or the ancient triumphal arches of Rome. The official ledger claims this 100-foot mountain of stone was erected in just 2 years, between 1898 and 1900. Behind the arch stood the Stanford Memorial Church. Before the earthquake, this church was crowned by a staggering, massive 80-foot stone and brick spire that dominated the entire skyline of the Santa Clara Valley. It housed an enormous clock and a massive bell chime system. During the earthquake, the Memorial Arch was catastrophically shattered. The top half of the colossal structure sheared off and collapsed into the courtyard. Simultaneously, the massive 80-foot stone spire of the Memorial Church snapped and plummeted violently through the roof of the nave. Here is the structural paradox. The towering, heavy, impossible elements, the arch and the spire, suffered total, irrecoverable failure. Yet, the sprawling, single-story, interconnected cloisters of the main quadrangle, the heavy, low-lying Romanesque archways surrounding the courtyard, they largely survived. They suffered damage, yes, but they did not collapse. The mainstream explanation is simple physics. Tall, top-heavy stone structures are highly vulnerable to seismic shear forces, while low, broad structures are naturally more resilient. This is, mechanically speaking, an accurate assessment. Nature acted as a perfect, unthinking censor. It erased the vertical anomalies and left the horizontal matrix intact. But the true anomaly is not what the earthquake destroyed. The true anomaly is what the institution decided to do next.
Following the devastation of 1906, the university's Board of Trustees faced a monumental cleanup operation. Jane Stanford had passed away the year prior. Control of the institution's destiny now rested in the hands of a board managing one of the largest concentrations of private wealth in the history of the United States. They were backed by the colossal assets of the transcontinental railroad monopoly. While the earthquake certainly strained liquid capital across California, this institution possessed the land, the influence, and the sheer financial gravity to execute any long-term reconstruction project they desired. The Memorial Arch and the Memorial Church Spire were the absolute crown jewels of the university. They were the specific, highly visible monuments dedicated to the memory of Leland Stanford and his family. Yet, as the years passed and the endowment grew to billions in modern equivalent purchasing power, they never rebuilt them. The university administration simply ordered the workers to clear away the thousands of tons of fallen sandstone. They dismantled the ruined base of the Memorial Arch, sweeping it completely until nothing remained but flat ground. They repaired the roof of the Memorial Church, but they absolutely refused to reconstruct the massive 80-foot stone spire. They simply capped the building with a lower, safer, infinitely less complex roofline.
Does this align with the psychology of a Gilded Age empire? Men who build 100-foot triumphal arches to their own legacy do not simply give up when a natural disaster strikes. They rebuild it. They build it larger. They build it with internal steel reinforcement to ensure it never falls again. You do not abandon the defining architectural centerpiece of your family's memorial unless you lack the engineering capacity to recreate it. If the Stanford engineers successfully designed, quarried, transported, and constructed a flawless 100-foot, deeply carved triumphal arch in 1898, they easily possessed the blueprints, the supply chains, and the institutional knowledge to rebuild it in the years that followed. Unless they did not possess the blueprints. What if the memorial arch and the massive stone spire were not built by Shepley, Rutten, and Coolidge in the late 19th century? What if these colossal, top-heavy structures were part of the antecedent architecture, the pre-existing grid that the university was anchored onto? When the seismic wave of 1906 shattered the arch and the spire, it destroyed a technology that the 19th century inheritors simply did not know how to replicate. They possessed the funds, they possessed the raw stone, but they lacked the lost engineering methodology required to balance thousands of tons of carved sandstone 100 feet in the air without modern steel framing. When the old world monuments fell, the inheritors could only sweep up the debris, pave over the scars, and pretend the skyline was always meant to be flat.
The audit of the Stanford Anomaly presents us with a deeply unsettling matrix of data. We have an impossibly complex subterranean labyrinth of vaulted brick, officially categorized as a simple utility trench. We have a cutting-edge scientific university, intentionally designed to mimic heavily weathered ancient ruins. We have a seismic event that surgically amputated the most impossible architectural feats on the campus. And we have a billionaire institution that mysteriously refused to rebuild its own crown jewels, despite possessing limitless capital. Do these data points describe a standard 19th century construction project? Or do they outline the precise boundaries of a massive, heavily funded recovery operation? As I stated at the beginning, I am not claiming the existence of shape-shifting entities or supernatural magic. I do not deal in mythology. I do not have the definitive answers to who originally built the subterranean arches beneath Palo Alto. I do not know who possessed the engineering capacity to carve the original memorial arch. What I have is the mathematics of the structural deficit. What I have is the shape of the silence. The physical evidence is embedded in the stone, buried in the steam tunnels, and conspicuously absent from the post-earthquake skyline. Do not accept the historical narrative simply because it is printed in a textbook. Look at the logistical impossibilities. Audit the architectural decision-making. Analyze the anomalies. You must decide for yourself what truly fits inside the shape of the silence. Subscribe to TitanMetrics. The ledger remains open.